want to, we can leave your friends behind. Cause your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, well, they're no friends of mine. I said, we can go where we want to, place where they will never find. And we can act like we come from out of this world, leave the real one far behind. We can dance. We can dance. We can go when we want to, the night is young and so am I. And we can dress real neat from our hats to our feet and surprise them with the victory cry. I said, we can act if we want to, if we don't, nobody will. And you can act real rude and totally removed, and I can act like an imbecile. Say, we can dance, everything's under control. We can dance, doing it wall to wall. We can dance, everybody look at your hands. We can dance, everybody's taking a chance. Who's to say to dance? Yes, to say to dance. Yes, to say to dance. Yes, to say to dance.
Warning: this podcast features adult subject matter, adult language, and things not meant for children to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. Live everybody, here on the I'm No Joe YouTube channel. Thank you for your patience first and foremost. This is a delayed show. I do apologize for that. This is normally what would be going on during the Sunday evening show about this time, where I would like to welcome you officially to the What Did I Say show? The show where I go back and recap the events that we talked about on the latest I'm No Joe episode, all the things MMA that have happened over the course of the weekend that followed the I'm No Joe podcast that you might have missed. So I would encourage you first and foremost to go back either here on the YouTube channel and catch the latest episode of the I'm No Joe podcast so you know what we're up for here, or if you don't want to get distracted by these influencer level faces, you can also go over to anchor.fm/I'm No Joe for all of the I'm No Joe podcast glory with none of the video. That's right, all audio form, so you can hear these sultry voices without being distracted by these unimaginable faces. That being said, thank you everyone for tuning in, whether you are here with me live or you catch us on a recap. I appreciate you either way for tuning in here with us. This particular episode of the What Did I Say show is predominantly about UFC 248. There was some other events that went off throughout the weekend as well. We mentioned those in the I'm No Joe podcast. The only one I'm going to mention here, aside from the UFC 248 card, because there was a lot that happened there, is going to be the Invicta Phoenix Rising 3 card. The reason I mention that is twofold, really. First and foremost, the most important reason, not a single fighter on that card missed weight. Not one. Every single one of those ladies on that card made weight. 2, that was the absolute first, and I'm using air quotes here, professional organized MMA sporting event ever put on with open scoring. That means after every single round, every single judge has to turn their score in, and everyone in the building got to see it. The fighters, the crowd, the coaches, the corners, the other judges, everyone. This is a huge factor because this is something that we have been trying to get implemented into MMA for a long time now, so that we can prevent bad judging decisions like we saw in Texas with Joe Solis just being completely fucking incompetent. And several other incidents that we have had since then. But aside from that, I want to get into a couple of things that happened not directly in UFC 248, but either during or as a result or preparation for UFC 248. Almost a news and recent events segment, if you will, but not quite, because this is all still pertaining to the recap here. So first and foremost, there was only, to their credit, one weight miss for UFC 248. Unfortunately, it was one of the ones that we were kind of trying to give a little bit of praise to without getting too deep on. It was the very first original ladies fight on the card, Emily Whitmire versus Viviane Pollyanna Vianney. That's what it is. Words. Sorry. Had a brain fart. You ever had one? I had one. Excuse me. Hell of a way to kick it off. But Emily Whitmire missed weight. Now, the thing about Emily Whitmire missing weight is that she missed by 2.5 pounds. Granted, it was her second attempt, and it was naked with the hoop of shame, arms up, still couldn't make the weight. But for whatever reason, we still have not had official clarification yet as of right now. We still have not had official clarification to tell us why this week Emily Whitmire misses weight by 2.5 pounds, and they pulled the entire fight from the card the night before the fucking fight. But last week, Davison Figueiredo misses weight by 2.5 pounds, albeit different circumstances, but same exact amount of weight, and they just had him forfeit 30% of his purse like you normally would, and the fight continued. It just made him ineligible for the championship, because in order to win a championship, you have to be within a pound of championship weight at weigh-ins. So, understandably, they took his 30% purse, they took his eligibility to win the belt away, and then the fight proceeded ahead of schedule. For whatever reason, this time, the quote-unquote premier early prelim fight was pulled from the card, even though Emily Whitmire missed the exact same amount of weight that last week Davison Figueiredo did, that we have seen multiple fighters over the last couple months missed by, and fights are still carried on. I don't understand why this one was pulled in particular, but believe me, I am going to keep digging, because that's one of those little things that will just stick in my craw and dig in the back of my fucking brain. The other one I want to talk about here real quick before we get into the fight breakdowns or the fight recaps themselves. Excuse me. 3 people who were questionable coming in whether they were going to make weight or not, because all 3 of them apparently were having a rough weight cut coming into fight week for UFC 248, and had made vocal mention of them having issues with a weight struggle, but that nothing should be worried about, that they were all going to make weight. Obviously, all 3 of them did, but it does bear mentioning. Yoel Romero, Sean O'Malley, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, all 3 did show up and make weight, but all 3 of them look gaunt, sunken in, and just absolutely fucking terrible on the scale. Realistically speaking, it may be time for all 3 of them to move up to the next division, because we know that both Yoel and Joanna both have new nutritionists and new coaches in their corner specifically to help them work on their weight cut, and both of them still clearly had issues, even though, to their credit, they both did make weight. Sugar Sean, there's no telling that fucking kid, there's no telling why he struggles so fucking hard. Maybe he's cutting too much. Maybe he's too worried about his fucking Fortnite career. It's hard to say at this point. But moving along from there. Okay, I'll save those. There is a couple more, but I'll save those at the end because they'll make more sense after we go through the recaps here. So, first thing pertaining to UFC 248 that I want to break down, that I feel it's not really a huge deal to most people, but I'm kind of a nerd about shit like this, and it fucking bothers me. Firstly, because I'm a person who in real life has a very difficult to pronounce name. I know several other folks as well who also have difficult to pronounce names, who genuinely appreciate when people take the time to learn how to say that name, specifically if it is part of your job, excuse me, to repeatedly be saying that name over and over. It makes you look like more of a professional when you make a point to learn how to say that name. Great example. Joe Rogan went out of his way to learn Magomed now I'm going to fuck it up. Magomed Magosherapov? I believe that's the gentleman's name. It's a very large, very complex name, and because he would have to say it multiple times, Joe Rogan worked with him and made a point to learn specifically how to say that name. Because when you have a difficult name and it has to be said over and over, it's much easier on you if the people who have to say it over and over at least say it correctly. We got a good example of when that goes wrong this weekend. The second fight on the early prelims, since things had been shuffled around. The gentleman's name, and he has made a point to correct this publicly in interviews. The gentleman's name is Guido Canetti. Not Guido, not Guiado. His name is Guido. And I understand in today's 2020 climate that the PC police might already have their sirens flipped, dropping it into drive, getting ready to come pull me over. That's the gentleman's name. He says it that way. His family says it that way. You should say it that way. That's how his name is pronounced. The only person on the fucking broadcast who was willing to say Guido Canetti was Bruce Buffer when he introduced him. Daniel Cormier, Joe Rogan, for some fucking reason, and John Anik, unsurprisingly, kept calling him Guido. Or Guado, I heard twice, which is equally as fucking hilarious. And it's not even like Guido is a terribly difficult word to pronounce when English is your first language, as is the case for all three of the broadcasters that we saw seated ringside. I don't understand what the issue is. I mean, let me rephrase that. I understand that it could be controversial when used out of context. But when you're specifically calling a fight, and this is the gentleman's name, and you're speaking about this gentleman, if it's that difficult for you, why would you just not call him Canetti? Why would you call him Guiado or Guido? Why would you purposefully mispronounce this gentleman's name when it's spelled phonetically? That being said, move along from there. We kind of got into this a little bit on the I'm No Joe podcast. Gerald Mearshart is a fucking badass, and he is fucking strong. The gentleman has a very, very vast tool set, and he put that on display for us beautifully Saturday night, when he not only outstruck, but then also out-wrestled, and then subsequently choked to submission Mini DC Deron Wynn. And it was interesting because when the fight started, you heard DC, even though you could tell he was trying to restrain himself, you could hear DC talking more about Deron Wynn than he was Gerald Mearshart. You could tell immediately that this fight was going to bother him to watch, and as a fan, as a person who doesn't like Daniel Cormier outside of his coaching premise to begin with, this was just joyful for me to soak in, because you got to do something that not many people ever do. They shut DC up. Gerald Mearshart, when he commenced to putting work on Mini DC, he put work on Mini DC. And the closer that fight got to ending, and you could see it heading that way real quick, the closer that fight got to ending, the quieter DC got about his fucking boy and about how this fight was progressing. I will say, to his credit though, at one point, DC did actually say that Deron Wynn needs to do more than he's doing if he wants to win this fight. So there was a tiny little moment where DC was legitimately critical of his fucking mini-me / shadow fight partner, but for the most part, he was clearly being biased and then subsequently quiet when his boy got his ass whipped, and he got that ass whipped. Moving along from there, the next fight was a strange one. This one almost felt like they tried to capitalize on a common theme running through the show, or the event rather, but they didn't really do it right. Mark Madsen was a Canadian Olympic wrestler, but when we got him in the ring, it didn't seem like he really remembered that he's not in the Olympics anymore, because his striking just wasn't there. His ground game just wasn't there. To his credit, he absolutely went in there and wrestled his fucking ass off. He was chain wrestling the absolute shit out of his opponent, but got outstruck in doing so, was not able to hold him down for literally more than 5 or 10 seconds in the best scenarios, and just really looked very one-dimensional and got a very, very lucky decision given in his favor, because even ringside commentators and the internet immediately blew up in the fact that, congrats to an Olympic gold medal, or an Olympic wrestler getting a win on a big platform like a UFC pay-per-view card, but on the other hand, you lost that fucking fight, bro. You got your ass beat. Granted, you had moments of greatness in your chain wrestling, in your appearing dominant when you had those chain wrestling connections going. But if that's all you can do, you'll never survive the UFC. And the fact that he got so fucking overly hyped and braggadocious when they came and tried to do the post-fight interview with him backstage, it looks bad on you, man. I genuinely believe that if there's a split decision, you shouldn't talk in the octagon, with the exception, obviously, of a title fight. And even then, when you get to what we're going to talk about in a little bit, maybe you shouldn't talk in the ring for that either. But moving along to the next one here. Grab a drink real quick. So, this brings me back to one of those situations. I say it all the time, and I'm going to say it again here now, so I'm sorry in advance if you get tired of it. Regardless of how I feel about a fighter, I try to always give credit where credit is due. If I like you or not, it doesn't matter, because I try to be as unbiased as I can when it comes to accomplishments. Now, on a personal level, if I don't like your attitude, you can eat a fat bag of dicks, and I give zero fucks how you feel about that. When it comes to an athletic point of view, when it comes to a sports point of view, when it comes to a sportsman point of view, sportsmanship even, continue the chain, I always try to give credit where credit is due. This is one of those situations here, because as I have probably made pretty clear right by now, I am not a fan of Sean O'Malley. I don't like his attitude, I don't like his personality, and I don't think his style is that interesting. I don't think he is nearly worth the hype that he is trying to put around himself. The whole Welcome to the Sugar Show performance on fucking Contender Series is literally laughable when you take into consideration the fact that he was a soup can fighting another soup can, and then reacted when he beat a soup can like he just won the fucking world championship. Fuck that guy. But, like I said, I do try and make a point to give credit where credit is due. Saturday night, Sugar Sean legitimately looked pretty good. And I say pretty good because he looked far from the spectacular performance that he kept touting himself that he was going to put on. Subsequently, the other half of that fight, because as we'll talk about again later, it takes two to tango. For whatever reason, Jose Quinones did not show up on Saturday night. The gentleman we saw in that ring was not a Jose Quinones we have ever seen fight before. I don't know for a fact what led to the change in the Jose that we've seen just be absolutely fucking dominating, and the Jose that we saw come out Saturday night that looked gun-shy, that looked timid, that looked unsure on his feet, that looked uncertain of himself, and ended up getting fucking stopped. But I will say this, if I had to speculate, if I had to make a guess, as a facially follicled individual here, I am inclined to believe that Jose Quinones threw off his own groove. What I mean by that is that, traditionally speaking, pretty much up until this weekend, Jose Quinones has been known as an Aztec Mexican warrior with one of the most glorious, gigantic, Old West-style handlebar mustaches, and he is one of very few people in the world who can legitimately pull that look off and look intimidating as shit and not like a 1800s pedophile. for whatever reason, when we saw him come out this weekend, Jose Quinones had grown out the full beard. And now, to be fair, obviously, I have no issue with full beards. But if that's what you're going to rock, that's what you need to rock. And in the case of Jose Quinones, we saw that badass handlebar mustache rocking Aztec Mexican warrior not come out on Saturday night. What we saw was a bearded gentleman who kind of resembled a little bit Quinones once in a while, and then got finished and disappeared back into the shame of the backstage area. That's a little disappointing as a fan. Now, that'll bring us on to the next fight. That was a close fight. It was closer than we thought it was going to be, but it was a genuinely good fight. I'm talking, of course, about Cowboy Oliveira versus Max Griffin. Cowboy Oliveira came out and looked absolutely crisp from the start to the finish. He looked good everywhere that fight was. To be fair, Max Griffin looked pretty fucking good as well. This was a legitimately good matchup. Excuse me. And a very good fight overall. Stylistically, they played well against each other. Neither one of them took a step back. They were both bringing it the entire time. Both of them were trying to be very technical while imposing their will and keeping their game plan in place. It was a very good, very close fight. Do I think Griffith did enough to get that nod? No. But the other neat little counterpiece to this particular fight itself, I thought I had my card here. There we go. The caveat, if you will, to this particular Cowboy fight is once Cowboy Oliveira got out of the octagon on his way back, Cowboy Cerrone, as we saw during the play-by-plays and the crowd cuts, was sitting cage side in the front row. As they were walking down, Cowboy Cerrone stood up to cheer on Cowboy Oliveira, who then promptly took his cowboy hat, took one of his Brazilian feathers out of it, and gave it to Cowboy Cerrone and put it in his hat, who immediately put it on social media and said that feather's never coming out, that cowboys got to look out for each other. So it was genuinely good to see the cowboy camaraderie outside of the ring for that match as well. Realistically, in the overall sense of what that fight meant, I genuinely would consider that a wash. Not good, not bad. Similar to if that fight would have been a draw, honestly, in my opinion. They both looked very good, but neither one of them really did enough to be able to arguably edge out a decision. It was very close. I obviously think Cowboy won that fight, but I can see how it could have gone either way. It was that close. I'm not mad about the decision. I think Cowboy did a little bit more, but that, again, is from my point of view. I was not sitting cage side watching like the judges were, so got to take that with a grain of salt as well. Moving along to the next match we're going to talk about here. The return of Neil Magny against Li Jingliang, the Leech. Now, this, we had a feeling was going to be a good match. Turned out to be a lot better than we thought it was going to be. Again, which I'm never mad when that happens. I'm always happy to be surprised when I think a fight is going to be okay or when I think a fight is going to be good, and then it turns out to either be great or just be spectacular. This was one of those. This was quite legitimately a wrestling and grappling chess match between two very high-level players, and we saw in Neil Magny that there is no ring rust in this particular situation. He had absolutely no ring rust. I'm not sure if he has just been staying extremely active in the gym, if he has been working on coaching more or what, but Neil Magny, to his credit, looked very, very good in that fight and looked like there was no ring rust. Again, I don't 100% agree with the decision at the end, but again, this is another one of those that was close enough. I won't complain about the decision, but I would have liked to have seen it go the other way. That's just me, though. Sometimes you get a little feelings attached to your picks. What are you going to do? We're human, right? But that's going to bring us to one of the just absolute best fights of the night. And I mentioned during the I'm No Joe podcast, this was my dark horse fight. And god damn did it fucking live up to some fucking hype, man. Benyel Dariush is a fucking beast. Danielle fucking Dariush. I encourage everyone to go back and rewatch this fight just to get that little oh shit moment that I am sure that you will have when you watch this fight. Drakkar Klose, we said it, man. We said it before. He completely overlooked and disregarded Benyel Dariush and talked shit like he was just going to walk right through him. And Benyel Dariush is a fucking badass. He is no one to be taken lightly, and he is definitely no one to be overlooked. And he showed us that in a beautiful performance in just shutting the fuck up Drakkar Klose. It was close, but no Drakkar. Haha. Wink. Anyway, that brings us to the co-main event recap here, if it will. What has since then been dubbed by most people, including professionals, Dana White even said it. This was, in Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Weili Zhang, one of the best title fights in UFC history, period. Not men, not women, period. Excuse me. The way that those two ladies went back and forth constantly from, damn, got the hiccups now, from the opening bell, to the closing bell. God damn it, these hiccups are going to kill me. They battled for every second of every round in that fight. That being said, Weili Zhang absolutely got the best of every single exchange they had in 5 rounds, save for 2 or 3 in the earlier rounds that put a little bit of swelling on the corner of each one of Weili's eyes, and then a very wild desperation shot at the very end of the fight that clipped Weili just behind the eye and opened just the tiniest little, like, pinky tip sized cut, just enough to get a little blood and show for the judges. But Weili Zhang beat the fucking shit out of Joanna Jędrzejczyk so bad that she developed a hematoma on her forehead. I'm not exaggerating, folks. It was the size of both of my fists together wide and both of my fists together tall. At least a solid fist off the forehead. She had a massive blood knot on her skull that Weili then proceeded to pound the shit out of for another 2 rounds. It developed midway through the second, and they went back and showed the replay. It was a clean counter right that landed right on the fucking money against Joanna's forehead in the second that you could see start to puff it up. By the time the 3rd round got here, we had a full-on hematoma, folks. In round 4 and 5, it got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where she almost looked like she was cosplaying as Rocky Dennis at the end of the fucking fight. Weili Zhang absolutely dominated that match from start to finish with no exception, with no question. The only question I had about that fight was that somehow, after those 2 ladies who went to the hospital together to be examined, neither one of them did any post-fight interviews. They went to the hospital together to be examined just to make sure. The only question I was left with after that fight was how the fuck, an hour after they were checked into the hospital, Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Weili Zhang were both, quote-unquote, released with no significant injuries. Weili Zhang, I understand. She literally only gotten hit like 5 times with significant power, had a little bit of swelling and a little cut that probably required 2 stitches, maybe. It was a small enough cut, you probably could have superglued or butterflied that with some tape shut. But Joanna's Ferengi forehead, they released her from the hospital an hour later with a hematoma that big, that severe, with just a small, like, it almost looked like she was wearing a respiratory mask over it. They called it a bandage to keep her head compressed. But there's no fucking way I encourage everyone, when this show is over, take 2 seconds. Just open a Google Chrome window or a Google window on whatever, Chrome, Firefox, whatever. Open a fucking Google search and look at Joanna Jacek 248. Look at her fucking forehead and tell me there is any medical professional in the world who would let her walk in, walk right back out, not keep that for fucking monitoring, at least for a couple of hours, if not overnight, to make sure. That was fucking ridiculous. Now, that being said, once that fight was over, we now move on to basically Dana and the MMA journalists on site who were doing their recaps pretty much all agreed that this is Joanna's last title shot at 115. Realistically, if she wants another title shot, she needs to move up to 125 and put on a dominant performance, because even there, Valentina already beat the fucking brakes off of her not that long ago. So in order for her to even have a chance at 125, she needs to move up in weight and then be as dominant in 125 as she used to be at 115 before she got in her own fucking head and became a piece of shit fucking egomaniac. But the other interesting takeaway from that fight was that now, for some reason, I'm not really sure why, there are talks about Weili Zhang moving up to 125 to challenge Valentina for the 125 belt. I don't get that. I don't see that as maybe the initial game plan. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination ruling that out, because Weili is big for 115. She has no issues making weight, never has, but she is big for 115. So if she decided she wanted to go up to 125 and keep that much more weight on her, she could be a very, very big challenge at 125 as well. Now, the question is, could she be enough of a challenge to legitimately threaten Valentina? I don't believe so. I'm a big fan of Weili Zhang, and I am very excited to see her be the dominant champion we had a feeling she could be. But I think Weili Zhang only stays champion of the strawweight division until we see the Jessica Andrade Rose Namajunas rematch. I think if Rose comes in and puts in the work like we all expect her to, and dominates Jessica Andrade like she was before the contestably illegal slam that ended the match the last time they fought, I think if Rose comes in and does work and just puts Andrade the fuck away, there is no denying she gets the next immediate title shot. Now, I will say this is a bit of a double standard here, because in my opinion, even if Jessica somehow beats Rose legitimately this time, I don't feel that she, in any sense of the word, is ready or deserving of a title shot rematch against Weili Zhang. That was too dominant. That was too easy. That was the typical Jessica Andrade that we saw in that fight. I don't think anything changes as we see it the second time around, except maybe Weili finishing her faster and more violently. That being said, I still think Rose comes back and takes her belt after she beats Jessica, and then things in the strawweight division go back to interesting again, with Tatiana still hanging up in the wings, Joanna refusing to go away so they can keep her as like a fifth top five gatekeeper kind of thing. It could get interesting. Now, the main event. Where do I even fucking start here? This has since then been widely described, and I think, to be fair, I think a small part of why this is getting such criticism is because just before this, we saw an absolute 25-minute war, led and won completely by Weili Zhang, but Joanna was never completely out of it. She was rocked and wobbled a couple times. She obviously had this giant fucking knot on her head, but she was never completely out of it. She was still trying, which is what you want to see, what makes a great fight, which is why they say that was arguably one of the best title fights we have ever seen. Joanna at no point was ever in control or in a position to look like she was winning the fight, but it was a great battle nonetheless. So it kind of spoiled everybody in the moment. Because then we got Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya, and since then has been determined the worst title fight, at least in middleweight history. What we saw Saturday night was hyped up to be one of the greatest 185-pound battles in the history of combat sports. One of the scariest guys versus one of the scariest newer guys. What we got was Yoel Romero, who quite literally stood in the center of the octagon for the first 2 minutes of the fight like this. No movement, no dancing, literally completely guarded up like a Hammer Brother from Mario 3 and stood still for 2.5 minutes. Now, even after the 2.5 minutes of Hammer Brother time that Yoel showed us, he never engaged. Never once. He quite clearly wanted to hang back, try and lure Israel into his defenses, and then counterpunch and go for the knockout. To be fair, Israel Adesanya is not that stupid. He kept trying to engage from distance, but never committing, never getting too close, never giving Yoel a window to really take advantage of. There were 2 strikes landed in the first round by Yoel. One where he did unload with a big overhand shot, and it clipped Izzy, which immediately caused him to adjust and not get back into that position. One attempted counter-strike that kind of landed, so they called it a strike. Israel, on the other hand, landed 4 shots in the first round, trying to figure out what the fuck Yoel was doing and where he could get in without legitimately jeopardizing himself or risking his consciousness against that fucking weirdo. But the whole rest of the fight played out very similarly. Yoel stayed flat-footed. He never engaged. He clearly wanted to just counter and knock out Adesanya. And Adesanya is not that fucking dumb. He would never give him the opportunity. Adesanya, after about 2.5 rounds of nothing really catching traction, decided that he was going to go to the legs. And he started kicking the absolute shit out of Yoel Romero's legs. And after the fight, we saw he had multiple hematomas, the size of my fist, welling up off a very clearly red, battered, bruised, and injured knee. Even though in the post-fight press conference, Yoel went up and did a little fucking stupid salsa dance like he always does to show that he no hurt. I fucking promise you, I promise every one of you that today, maybe not in the moment, but today, that knee is blown up, bright purple, and fucking painful. It hurts. You could tell where that leg was going. The thing that comes out of this is that people got hyped for a pay-per-view fight of 2 of the biggest names in middleweight, what could have been a great fight. And instead what we got was the Francis Ngannou versus Derek Lewis of the 185-pounders. It was literally the most gun-shy, least entertaining fight we have seen in the 185-pound division. And to be fair, in the beginning, it legitimately looked like there was a mental chess match going on. And as the fight wore on, we realized that it wasn't so much of a chess match as Yoel just riding his fucking coast. Or Yoel just coasting, excuse me. He was trying to ride in on Izzy's coattails, that's what it was, and wait for him to get sloppy and try and headhunt for the knockout. But Adesanya's not that stupid. I say it all the time. Israel Adesanya has one of the highest fight IQs in the UFC, maybe in MMA. He sees it coming. He reads it. He adapts. He adjusts. He's quick to move. He's smart. He doesn't put himself in a lot of trouble. So what we got was a very, very boring fight, which didn't give the judges a whole lot to go on to score. Afterwards, it turns out that both Joanna and Wei Li landed individually. Either one of them landed more punches during their fight than both Yoel and Israel combined even attempted during their 5-round fight. So there's something to be said about that as well. End of the night, Adesanya retains his belt. It wasn't pretty, but it was intelligent. He fought the smartest way you could against Yoel playing the games that he was playing. So Dana comes out in the post-fight press conference, says, that fight was fucking boring. It sucked. Look, we get it. On to the next one. Paulo Costa is next for Israel Adesanya. Dana says that's the next fight. As soon as he's healthy, nobody else step in line. Oh, God damn it. I don't agree with Costa getting the next shot. I don't agree that Costa is legitimate. Aside from his fucking steroid issues, which are very apparent if you look at him, he's a shit fighter. He's got a boring style. He barely edged out a decision against Yoel Romero prior to Yoel fighting Israel. And honestly, I don't think Yoel deserved that fight off of that performance or his previous 4 performances, to be honest. But that's what Israel wanted, so that's what Israel got. We're in a moment right now where the champs get to call their fucking shots, which is also why UFC 250 has Henry Cejudo, that little fuckstick, defending his 135-pound belt, because he lost the 125-pound belt for being a piece of shit and bottlenecking 2 divisions, against Jose Aldo, who made one in his career, one fight at 135 pounds, look like shit getting there, and lost the fight. Now, granted, it was a close fight, it went to decision, but he lost. He lost. He looked like shit the first time down to that weight and lost his first fight in that division and is now getting a title shot in that division because that's what the champion wanted. I don't agree with that in any way, shape, or form. I don't think Yoel should have been here. I think we're going to see a maybe not to the same degree, but an equally disappointing fight when those two get in the cage as well, regardless of the fucking outcome of that match. But Dana says Paulo's next, so we'll see what Paulo can do. Now, the funny thing is that immediately after the main event ended, Paulo Costa started talking so much shit and tried to rush the octagon to start a fight with Israel and Yoel that he got kicked out of the fucking event before the show was officially over. They escorted him and almost wouldn't let him come to the post-fight press conference because he tried to barge his way in while Dana was sitting there talking about he was a fucking asshole and got kicked out of the event. During Dana talking about that, Paulo tries to come fucking rushing in and take over the press conference while Dana is talking about how he got kicked out. Fuck out of here. I don't think Paulo deserves it. But that's the fucking world we live in right now. So we're going to have to wait and see how that shakes out. Other interesting news. During the fight, apparently before the Costa situation, sometime between the co-main finishing and the main getting ready to walk out, there was an altercation in the crowd in the fighter's box. Jay Park, who is a Korean rapper who also does translating work for the Korean Zombie, did it on Ariel Helwani's MMA show, has done a couple other smaller performances for him, has translated for him. Korean Zombie has developed the ability to talk shit recently. A lot of people attribute that to the way that Jay Park is interpreting the things that Korean Zombie is saying. We haven't really had any confirmation either way. Jay Park is denying it, but there are plenty of people online. I don't speak Korean, so I can't speak to this literally. But a lot of people online who do speak Korean are coming out very boisterously saying that Jay Park is twisting what the Korean Zombie is saying to make it more shit-talky, because we all know the Korean Zombie is a very respectful man. We've seen it his entire fucking career in and out of the cage. Korean Zombie is generally very respectful. But recently, since he's come back from his mandatory military service, he's had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder in some of his translations. And it turns out that part of that might be because of the way that people like Jay Park have been translating for him. Well, aside from that, there has been a couple of back and forths between Jay Park and Brian Ortega on Instagram and Twitter since Jay Park translated the last time when they were talking about Zombie versus Ortega. Well, it all boiled over and came to a head during the pause between co-main and main at UFC 248 when Brian Ortega apparently pushed through several people in a crowd to get over to Jay Park while the Korean Zombie had gotten up to go to the bathroom and legitimately bitch slapped him. Like, once the bitch slap happened, Jay Park says he got back up and shoved him, and then the people jumped in to stop everything from happening. But even Dana White talked about how there was a straight-up incident. Brian Ortega straight up slapped somebody in the fucking crowd. They didn't know in the moment. We know now that it was Jay Park, but that's weird. For one, that's not generally T-City's style. For two, we've seen in social media development since then that there is legitimately a feud between Jay Park and Brian Ortega now because of Jay Park's place in this and his potentially maliciously mistranslating some things that the zombie has said. So that was an interesting thing that played out. Now, the last little thing that I do want to talk about here, we got our money adjustments released yesterday. Since I'm not doing this on Sunday, I had extra time to do a little research, looked into the money breakdowns. We had 2 performances of the night. Obviously, Beneil Dariush and his fucking dominant performance against Your Car Close got one of those performance bonuses. The other one, begrudgingly, went to Sugar Sean O'Malley. I don't get that. That was far from performance bonus worthy, in my opinion. Go back and rewatch it for yourself, but fuck that guy, and I don't think he deserved that bonus. But Beneil Dariush and Sean O'Malley got performance of the night bonus, and then very clearly, the co-main event, Joanna versus Wiley, got the fight of the night bonus. So that will bring us to the end of the show here. That is all the notes I have got for you lovely folks for this evening. I will say this Thursday we will have our regularly scheduled I'm No Joe podcast. Knock on wood, nothing happens between now and then. Should be going off as scheduled, talking about this weekend's card coming up. Kevin Lee versus Charles Dubronx Oliveira. Those two have already done a face-off, and Kevin Lee looks like a fucking idiot. That haircut alone makes you just want to slap the shit out of that fucking moron. But we'll talk more about that fight as we get closer to this weekend. I do want to say thank you to everyone who came out live. I appreciate you guys. I see you over there, even if I wasn't interacting. I just wanted to try to get through this because there really isn't a whole lot, but there was a whole lot at the same time. So I appreciate you guys that came out live. I appreciate each and every one of you who watched this on the replay. We are going to wrap this up, though. So if I entertained you, if I made some good points, if you appreciate the recap, give me a thumbs up. If my insight is starting to develop and you're starting to see why I choose some of the things I do and you appreciate that, subscribe. We constantly have content, and I would appreciate your subscription. If you get it now, if the glasses are becoming more clear and you see why I do this, because we kind of do have a little bit of insight into things like that, and that is something that you really genuinely enjoy and appreciate, share an episode of the show. Any one of them, I don't care. We're trying to grow this thing, and any more exposure is good exposure at this point. I would appreciate that. Now, on the other side of that coin, if I'm just some dumbass sitting in front of a camera who brings his dumbass friends in front of a camera and we talk out our ass without knowing what the fuck we're actually talking about, give me a thumbs down. I earned it, and I won't dispute that. But that being said, we are going to call this all for now. Thank you again to everyone who came out. I will see you all Thursday night for the I'm No Joe podcast with my regular crew of shenanigan havers. So remember, until next time, you can root for anything. Don't let ignorance stop you. Unless you really somehow think that Epstein killed himself, in which case...
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kicks were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening.